Remember when couples actually had to work through their problems face to face, without the luxury of passive-aggressive texts or the temptation to ghost each other for 3 days? In the 1970s, settling an argument with your partner was an entirely different beast. Raw, unavoidable, and strangely intimate in ways that might feel almost foreign today. There were no relationship podcasts to guide you, no therapists making house calls via Zoom, and certainly no algorithm suggesting the perfect apology meme. When tension filled the air in a 1970s household, you dealt with it right there, in real time, using the tools and rituals of an era that believed in talking things out, or sometimes just letting time and routine smooth over the rough edges. This is the story of how ordinary couples navigated the storms of disagreement, when the only screen between them was the one showing All in the Family, and the only relationship advice came from your mother, your best friend over coffee, or the occasional magazine column tucked between recipes and fashion tips. The kitchen table was the unofficial mediator of countless 1970s arguments. Picture this: the Formica surface, cool under your forearms, maybe a burnt orange or avocado green that screamed the decade's aesthetic. A half-empty percolator sat between you and your partner, still warm, the coffee bitter and strong. The overhead light, probably a brass fixture with frosted glass, cast everything in a yellow glow that made the moment feel both harsh and oddly safe. This was where you hashed things out, sometimes for hours. The kitchen was neutral territory, domestic enough to keep things from feeling too formal, but public enough within the home that voices stayed measured. You'd sit across from each other, cigarettes burning in a glass ashtray between you, and you'd talk, really talk. There was nowhere to storm off to that felt truly separate. Homes were smaller, walls were thinner, and privacy was a luxury. The kitchen table forced proximity, forced you to see your partner's face, to watch their expressions shift from anger to hurt to something softer. Today, you might text from different rooms, or wait until you've each scrolled through your phones long enough to cool down. But back then, that table was your relationship's battlefield and peace treaty signing spot all at once. Can you remember the last time you sat down with someone, no phones, and just talked until the problem was actually resolved? The cooling off drive became a ritual for many couples, particularly men who'd been taught that walking away was sometimes the answer, but temporarily, not permanently. When voices started rising and the walls felt too close, someone would grab the car keys. You'd hear the jangle, see your partner head for the door, and then the sound of the engine turning over, maybe a Chevy Nova or a Ford Pinto, something with real weight and a rumble you could feel in your chest. They'd drive, sometimes just around the neighborhood, watching the streetlights flicker on as dusk settled, sometimes farther, out to where the subdivisions gave way to empty lots, or the edge of town where you could actually see stars. The car radio played whatever the local station offered. Carole King, the Eagles, maybe some Marvin Gaye if you were lucky. The motion itself was therapeutic. The steering wheel, something solid to grip. The road, a distraction that let your mind work through things without the pressure of your partner's eyes on you. Then, usually within an hour or two, you'd hear that engine again in the driveway, the door opening, and your partner would come back inside. Not necessarily with an apology formed, but with the edge worn off, ready to try again. There was an understanding that leaving meant returning, that the drive was a pause button, not an eject button. Today, taking space might mean days of silence, or a text that says, "We need to talk," followed by nothing. But in the 70s, taking space meant 30 minutes with AM radio and then walking back through your own front door. When was the last time you gave someone space, but made sure they knew you weren't actually leaving? The long-distance phone call forced accountability in a way we've completely lost. If you had an argument and one of you was traveling, maybe a business trip, maybe visiting family 3 states over, you couldn't just let it sit. Long-distance calls cost real money, the kind you noticed on your monthly bill. Each minute ticked by with financial weight, which meant you couldn't afford to waste time being petty or drawing things out. You'd wait until the rates dropped after 9 p.m., then you'd dial carefully, listening to each mechanical click as the rotary phone spun back into place. When your partner answered, there was often a slight delay, a hollowness to the connection that made every word feel more intentional. You talked faster, got to the point quicker, but somehow also said more meaningful things because you knew this conversation had to count. There was no, "I'll text you later," or "We'll talk about it when you get back." The urgency of the medium forced resolution, or at least progress. You could hear everything in their voice. The tiredness, the softness, the moment when anger started to break, because voice was all you had. No emojis to soften the blow, no typing bubbles to watch anxiously, just breath and words and the crackle of hundreds of miles of copper wire between you. When you finally said goodbye, it wasn't just talk later. It was I love you or we're okay or something that closed the loop, because that call cost $8.50 and you both knew it. How often do we actually finish our arguments now versus just letting them fade into the scroll of our message history? The handwritten letter served as the emergency brake when face-to-face words failed. There was something about putting pen to paper, usually a ballpoint bic on lined notebook paper, or maybe proper stationery if you were more formal, that forced you to slow down and organize your thoughts. You'd sit at that same kitchen table, or maybe in the bedroom on the edge of the bed, and you'd write. The physical act of forming each letter, feeling the slight resistance of pen against paper, gave you time to process what you actually meant versus what you'd shouted in the heat of the moment. You couldn't delete or backspace. If you messed up, you either crossed it out, which showed your process, your struggle to find the right words, or you started over entirely. These letters got left on pillows, tucked into lunchboxes, propped against the bathroom mirror. They were tangible proof that you'd taken time to think, to care, to try. Your partner could hold the paper, see where you'd pressed harder when emotion peaked, notice the coffee ring where you'd set your mug down while searching for the next sentence. Often these letters said things that felt too vulnerable to say face to face. I was scared, not really angry. Or, I heard my father's words coming out of my mouth and I hated it. Or, I don't want to be like this with you. The letter could be read privately, absorbed slowly, and then discussed later when both people had steadied themselves. Today we might fire off a long text or email, but the speed of digital communication removes that cooling off period built into writing by hand. You can't rage type a letter the way you can rage text. The medium itself was the message. I cared enough to sit still, to think, to physically craft these words for you. Do you remember the last time you wrote something by hand to someone you loved? Something that cost you time and made your hand cramp? The weekly routine provided automatic reset points that kept grudges from festering. In the 1970s, the week had a rhythm, a predictable structure that created natural opportunities for reconciliation. Sunday might be church and family dinner. You couldn't stay icy to each other through pot roast with both sets of parents watching. Wednesday was maybe bowling league or the night you always watched the Bob Newhart show together. Friday was payday and often date night, even if that just meant splitting a pizza and seeing what was playing at the drive-in. These fixed points in time meant you couldn't nurse an argument for weeks the way modern life allows. You had to either resolve it or at least achieve a working ceasefire because Tuesday night you were both committed to helping with the church fundraiser, or Thursday the neighbors were coming over for cards. The social fabric was tighter, the obligations more regular, and that meant your relationship had to bend and flex and find its way back to baseline more frequently. You couldn't cancel plans via text or avoid each other by staying late at work scrolling through social media in your car. If you'd argued Tuesday afternoon, you still had to share a bench seat in the car Tuesday evening driving to your weekly grocery shop, her thigh pressed against yours, whether either of you liked it or not, forced into proximity until one of you finally said something that broke the ice. The routine didn't solve the problem necessarily, but it prevented the Cold War. It kept you in motion together, which is sometimes all a relationship needs to find its footing again. How many modern arguments just drift, unresolved, because we can avoid each other indefinitely in our separate schedules and separate screens? The apology gift had weight and intention because you couldn't just click add to cart at midnight. If you'd really messed up, forgot an anniversary, said something cruel, stayed out too late with the guys from work, you made it right with something physical and chosen. For women, it might be flowers, but not delivered by a service. You drove to the actual florist, the one with the bell that jingled when you opened the door, and the older woman behind the counter who knew exactly what I screwed up flowers looked like. She'd wrap them in green paper, tie them with string, and hand them over still cool from the refrigerator case. You drove home with them on the passenger seat, pedals trembling with each turn, already rehearsing what you'd say when you walked through the door. For men, maybe she showed up at his work with his favorite lunch from the deli, a corned beef on rye wrapped in wax paper still warm, or she'd bought that album he'd mentioned wanting, the one she'd have to ask the clerk to find in the bins. The gift itself mattered less than the effort it represented. Time spent, thought given, the willingness to be vulnerable enough to make a gesture. You handed it over directly, watched their face change as they understood what you were trying to say. There was no tracking number, no screenshot to prove you ordered something. The gift arrived with you, carried by you, offered by your hands into theirs. Today we can schedule an Uber Eats apology or text a Venmo payment with a heart emoji. But back then, making amends required you to show up, to be present in the discomfort of your own apology. When was the last time you apologized with something you had to carry to someone yourself? The mutual friend intervention actually worked because your social circle was smaller and more invested. In the 70s, most couples had a tight orbit of friends, maybe 2 or 3 other couples you saw regularly, double dated with, knew inside and out. When you were fighting, truly stuck, these friends knew. Not because you posted about it or subtweeted, but because they saw you at the Friday night gathering and noticed the space between you, the way you didn't laugh at each other's jokes, the careful politeness that signaled trouble. And because they cared, because your relationship stability mattered to the whole group's dynamic, someone would intervene. Usually the wives would talk to the wife, the husbands to the husband. They'd meet for coffee at someone's kitchen counter or chat while watching the kids play in the backyard, and they'd say things like, "So, what's really going on with you two?" These friends had credibility. They'd seen you through other fights, knew your patterns, had probably been through similar struggles themselves. They could call you on your bullshit or validate your feelings, whichever you needed. Sometimes they'd even arrange a setup. "Hey, we're all meeting at O'Malley's Saturday, you should come." Somehow you'd both end up there, forced into the same booth, surrounded by people who loved you both and expected you to figure it out. This wasn't meddling, it was community maintenance. Your friends had a stake in your relationship working because relationships were woven together, interdependent. Today we might post vague Facebook statuses or vent to online strangers, but we've lost that kitchen table friend who looks you in the eye and says, "You're being ridiculous," or "He needs to hear this from you, not from me." Do you have anyone in your life now who knows your relationship well enough to tell you the hard truth? The makeup ritual of physical reconnection happened without negotiation or discussion. After the talking, after the cooling off, after whatever apology or understanding had been reached, there was a moment, sometimes hours later, sometimes the next morning, when one person would reach across the space between you, maybe a hand on the shoulder while passing in the hallway, maybe sliding closer on the couch until your legs touched. In bed, maybe a foot extended to find the others, or rolling over to fit yourself against their back the way you always had before the fight. This physical reconnection was the final punctuation mark on the argument, the nonverbal signal that you were okay again, that the breach had been repaired. Nobody said, "I think we should be intimate again to reconnect." You just did it, instinctively understanding that bodies sometimes make peace faster than mouths. The morning after a fight, you might wake to coffee already made, your partner's way of saying, "We're good," without ceremony. Or you'd catch their eye across the room and smile, just slightly, and that was enough. The physical space of a 1970s home helped this too. You couldn't avoid each other long enough for the disconnection to become normal. The bathroom you shared, the bed you couldn't really split into sides because it wasn't big enough, the single TV you both wanted to watch. These forced you back into each other's orbit until the awkwardness dissolved and you were just yourselves again. There was no sleeping in separate rooms for a week. No, "I'll take the couch" that turned into a month of emotional distance. You worked it out, and then you physically came back together, sometimes before all the feelings were even sorted, trusting that proximity and routine would finish what words had started. How often now do we let physical distance mirror emotional distance until we can't remember how to close the gap? The advice from elders carried weight because divorce was still somewhat scandalous, and marriage was viewed as work worth doing. When things got really rough, you might talk to your parents, or more likely, the spouse would talk to their same gender parent. A daughter might sit with her mother shelling peas or folding laundry and confess, "We've been fighting about money," or "He doesn't listen to me." The mother, married 30 years herself, wouldn't suggest couples therapy or separation. She'd say things like, "Your father and I went through the same thing," or "Men don't think like we do, you have to tell him directly," or sometimes just, "Marriage is hard, honey, you work through it." This wasn't dismissive, it was perspective born from an era where you stayed and figured it out, where commitment meant pushing through the rough patches because that's what you'd promised. Fathers would tell sons, "Happy wife, happy life," or "Pick your battles," or "Take her out to dinner and let her talk." The advice was practical, often gender stereotyped by today's standards, but it came from lived experience and from people who'd weathered decades together. There was an assumption that conflict was normal, that every marriage had seasons of difficulty, and that you had to ride it out. This wasn't about staying in toxic or abusive situations, though tragically some did, but about not bailing at the first sign of incompatibility. Your parents or grandparents had survived the Depression, maybe a war. They'd raised kids on tight budgets and made it work. Their credibility came from endurance. Today, we might turn to therapists or online forums or self-help books, all valuable resources, but we've lost something in not having that intergenerational voice saying, "We went through this exact thing and here's what helped us." Who in your life now has been married long enough to guide you through the hard parts with the authority of someone who's actually survived them? The forced financial dependence meant both partners had skin in the game differently than today. In many 1970s marriages, there was still often one primary breadwinner, usually the husband, while the wife either didn't work outside the home or contributed a smaller secondary income. This created a financial dynamic where leaving wasn't simple for either party. The wife might not have independent credit or savings. The husband might be facing the prospect of alimony and child support that would cripple him financially. This isn't to romanticize financial dependence. It trapped many people in unhappy situations, but it did mean that when you fought, you both knew leaving would be catastrophically complicated. So you fought to fix it instead. You went to bed angry sometimes, sure, but you woke up and tried again because the alternative was too devastating to contemplate lightly. Money arguments were common. Who spent what? Whether you could afford that new couch, why he stopped for drinks with the guys when you were trying to save. But these arguments happened within a framework where both people understood the household budget was shared and fragile, that you genuinely were in it together financially. Today, with more financial independence and separate accounts, it's easier to think I could make it on my own, which is both liberating and potentially destabilizing to commitment. The 70s financial structure forced interdependence, which forced working through problems because you literally couldn't afford not to. Do you think financial independence makes relationships stronger, or does it make walking away too easy? The absence of digital communication meant you couldn't avoid the embodied discomfort of conflict. There was no way to be angry via read receipts. You couldn't leave someone unopened or post something passive-aggressive hoping they'd see it. When you were mad, your partner saw it in your face, heard it in the slam of the cupboard door, felt it in the stiffness of your body when they tried to hug you. This made stonewalling harder to maintain because silence in physical proximity is deafening. You'd be in the living room reading the newspaper with exaggerated focus while your wife folded laundry with aggressive precision, and the tension was so thick you could barely breathe. Eventually, someone broke because humans aren't actually wired to maintain that level of hostile silence when sharing a 1,200-square-foot ranch house. The fight had to go somewhere, either toward resolution or toward explosion, because there was no digital buffer to make ignoring each other sustainable. You couldn't text "fine" and then not respond for 6 hours. If you said "fine" through gritted teeth while staring at each other in the kitchen, you both knew it wasn't fine, and you'd have to deal with it by bedtime. The physicality of the conflict, the slamming doors, the heavy sighs, the deliberate footsteps was actually more honest than our modern silent treatments conducted via technology. At least everyone knew where they stood. At least the fight was visible and therefore had to be addressed. How many of our modern arguments never really end because they just dissolve into the digital ether? Unresolved, but no longer actively discussed? The cultural messaging around marriage emphasized perseverance over happiness. This sounds bleak by contemporary standards, but hear the nuance. Popular culture in the 70s, from sitcoms to songs to advice columns, generally promoted the idea that marriage was work, that love was a choice you kept making, and that happiness came from commitment rather than constant emotional fulfillment. Songs like "We've Only Just Begun" by the Carpenters or "Killing Me Softly" showed love as complex, not always easy. TV shows like The Mary Tyler Moore Show and All in the Family showed married couples bickering, disagreeing, working through differences. The message wasn't, "If you're unhappy, leave." It was, "Everyone's unhappy sometimes, that's normal." This created a framework where having a huge fight didn't immediately make you question the entire relationship. You didn't think, maybe we're not compatible after one bad month. You thought, we're going through something, and you waited it out. The advice columns in Good Housekeeping or Reader's Digest would talk about keeping the spark alive and working through rough patches, not 10 signs you should divorce him. This cultural backdrop created resilience, though, again, it sometimes kept people in situations they should have left. But for ordinary couples dealing with ordinary problems, money stress, parenting disagreements, hurt feelings, the cultural message that everyone goes through this stuff was actually stabilizing. It normalized conflict as part of commitment. Today's messaging emphasizes individual happiness, authentic living, not settling. All valuable concepts, but they can make normal relationship friction feel like a sign of fundamental incompatibility. When did we lose the cultural narrative that sometimes marriage is just hard and that's okay? The Weekend Project became an unspoken couples therapy session. Saturday mornings, you'd tackle something together: painting the bedroom, reorganizing the garage, planting the garden, working on the car. These projects required coordination, communication, passing tools back and forth, making decisions about where things should go or what color looked better. If you'd been fighting earlier in the week, the project forced you to cooperate, to speak in practical terms, to work toward a shared goal. There was something about being physically active, focused on something external to yourselves, that let the anger drain away naturally. You'd be up on a ladder painting while your partner cut in the edges below, and at some point you'd make a joke about something or ask their opinion on whether the color was too dark, and suddenly you were talking normally again. Your bodies were tired in a good way, productive, and at the end of the day, you'd stand back and look at what you'd accomplished together: the freshly painted room, the organized garage, the flower bed taking shape. That shared achievement was proof that you still functioned as a team, that you could still build something together even when you didn't particularly like each other that morning. There was no therapist guiding you through your feelings, but there was the rhythm of work, the satisfaction of completion, and the undeniable evidence that you were better together than apart. Today we might schedule a date night or a weekend getaway to reconnect, which is lovely, but there was something uniquely healing about just working side by side on something mundane and necessary. When was the last time you and your partner built or fixed or created something together with your hands, not just your wallets? The Sunday dinner table became the weekly referendum on relationship health. In many households, Sunday dinner was sacred: pot roast or fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can seasoned with bacon. Everyone sat down together, no TV on, and you ate as a family. If you and your spouse had been fighting, Sunday dinner forced a ceasefire. You couldn't keep the Cold War going while passing the rolls or asking someone to pass the salt. The kids were watching, maybe grandparents were there, and the normalcy of the ritual pulled you back toward center. You'd find yourself laughing at something your kid said, or your spouse would catch your eye across the table in shared amusement at your father-in-law's terrible joke. And just like that, a crack appeared in the ice. The meal was long. People actually sat at tables for 45 minutes or an hour, talking, eating slowly, having seconds. That much time forced interaction, and interaction usually led to thawing. By the time you were clearing dishes together, scraping plates, and running hot water, you'd maybe brush shoulders at the sink, and one of you would say something like, "I'm sorry about Tuesday," and the other would nod, and that would be enough. The structure of the weekly family meal created a forcing function for reconciliation. It said, we are a unit. We sit down together, we break bread, and we remember why we're doing this. Today, family dinner is a rarity. Everyone eats at different times, on different schedules, often in front of different screens. We've lost that weekly ritual that pulled families and couples back to the table, literally and figuratively. Do you think we'd fight differently if we still had to sit across from each other every single Sunday with nowhere to hide? The privacy of your struggles was both isolating and protective. In the 1970s, your marital problems were largely your business. You didn't post about them. You didn't have dozens of people weighing in with opinions. You didn't have a comment section analyzing your relationship based on a 3-paragraph vent. This privacy meant you felt alone sometimes, like you were the only couple struggling with debt or disconnect or in-law problems, but it also meant the fight stayed between you two. There was no peanut gallery, no ex-boyfriend chiming in with "you deserve better," no algorithm serving you divorce attorney ads based on your recent searches. You worked it out in private, and if you reconciled, there was no digital record of the fight to haunt you later. No screenshots, no posts you'd have to delete or explain. The fight could truly end and be forgotten, or at least archived in memory where details faded mercifully over time. This privacy also meant less outside pressure. Nobody was telling you to leave based on one story they heard. Your friends might know you were going through something, but they didn't know every detail, every text, every harsh word. They couldn't judge the whole relationship based on your worst moment because they hadn't witnessed your worst moment in high definition. Today we have more support and resources, which is genuinely good, but we've also invited the entire world into our relationships. Every fight can become a referendum on social media. Every grievance can be crowdsourced for validation. Sometimes I wonder if we'd stay together more or break up more wisely If we went back to handling our problems behind our own closed doors, how different would your relationship be if no one else knew about your fights except the two of you? The acceptance of imperfection in partners was less about low standards and more about realistic expectations. The 1970s didn't have the language of emotional intelligence, or love languages, or secure attachment. People didn't expect their spouse to be their best friend, their therapist, their passionate lover, their co-parent, their financial partner, and their personal cheerleader, all rolled into one perfectly optimized package. Men were often emotionally stunted by today's standards, raised to suppress feelings and focus on providing. Women were often constrained by limited options and societal expectations. But there was an understanding that your partner was a flawed human doing their best within the limitations of what they'd been taught and what was available to them. You didn't expect your husband to intuitively understand your emotional needs. You told him directly, or you vented to your girlfriends and moved on. You didn't expect your wife to be financially ambitious. You appreciated that she managed the household and raised good kids. This wasn't settling, or maybe it was, but it was settling for a realistic human rather than a fantasized perfect partner. When you fought, it wasn't about "you're not meeting my needs" as much as "we have this specific problem to solve." Fights were more concrete, less existential, and because expectations were different, disappointment was different too. Your partner didn't have to be everything. They just had to show up, try reasonably hard, and not bail when things got difficult. Today we want more from our partners, more emotional availability, more equality, more consciousness, and those are good evolutions. But have we made partnership impossible by expecting one person to be absolutely everything we need? Would we fight less if we expected less perfection? The simple truth is that couples in the 1970s settled arguments by actually staying in the room with each other, literally and emotionally, until something shifted. They didn't have the escape hatches we have now, the endless scroll to avoid conversation, the ability to conduct a cold war across text messages, the option to crowdsource validation from strangers online. They had to sit with the discomfort, sleep in the same bed even when they were angry, navigate the same small spaces until proximity and routine wore down the edges of conflict. They used their words, sure, but they also used their presence, their rituals, their communities, their simple physical existence in each other's space. They made coffee as an apology. They touched hands across a gear shift. They painted rooms and planted gardens and showed up to Sunday dinner even when they'd rather not. They stayed, not always because staying was right, but because leaving was harder, and because they'd been taught that love was something you did, not just something you felt. The fights were different then. Less therapeutic, maybe, less self-aware, certainly less equipped with modern vocabulary about boundaries and needs. But they were also more direct, more physical, more rooted in the immediate reality of sharing a life with another flawed human being. So here's what I want to know, and I really do want to hear from you. What do you think we've lost in how we fight with our partners now versus then? Drop a comment telling me about an argument style from the past that you think actually worked better, or maybe one you're glad we've left behind. And if this walk down memory lane hit you with some nostalgia, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find these conversations. Subscribe if you want more stories about how we used to live, love, and somehow figure it all out without Google telling us how. Because here's the thing, every generation thinks they've figured out relationships, and every generation is just stumbling through, making it up as they go, trying to love someone despite all the reasons it's difficult. The 1970s couples didn't have it all figured out, but they had something. Maybe just stubbornness, maybe actual wisdom. Either way, their arguments eventually ended, their marriages continued, and most of them would tell you it was worth the work. Would we say the same today? That's the question that keeps me up at night, and I think it's worth asking ourselves as we swipe, scroll, and search for connection in a world that's simultaneously more connected and more isolated than ever before. Thanks for listening, for remembering, and for thinking about what we might want to bring back from the way things used to be. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.